So for lab 9, we're going to kind of shift gears. So up to lab 6, 7, and 8 are kind of, I guess you could say, all in the same. They were all contributing towards the same thing, which was to get prices in our database, which we now have. And so now we're going to shift gears just a little bit, and we're going to do kind of a similar process. We're going to go through and we're going to do some table maintenance in lab 9, but there's one big thing that's going to be quite different, and that is that we are going to import data from an external source. And so the title of the lab is external tables, because what we're going to do is we're going to make it so our database will be able to read from a CSV file. And that's at the very last step. And so there's a little bit we're going to do to get ready up to that point. You could actually run step 4 about at any point, but there's a couple other steps that we're going to take in preparation for the next lab, which is lab 10. So step number 1 is we are going to create a table. We've done this quite a bit. So we create a transaction table, and this is going to hold, you guessed it, transactions. And a transaction is when we make a purchase. We do something like that. So if I rent a movie, I'm going to have a transaction. So we're going to create the transaction table. And then there's a couple other steps that go with it. One I want to talk about is this natural key. So it says you create a natural key. And what a natural key is it's a unique index. And basically through a variety of various information, we're saying that it's unique. So in this case, there will be a uniqueness to rental ID, transaction type, transaction date, and payment method type, payment account number, and transaction account, which is quite a bit. And one thing is you're not putting a unique key on each of these individually. What we're actually doing is we're putting a unique key across all of these. So just to give you an idea of what that would look like is, and I believe we might have done this before, but when we create our unique key, it'll actually look something like this. So you can see we create a unique index and we call it natural key, and we do it on transaction, rental ID, transaction type, transaction date, payment method type, payment account number, and transaction account. So you can see that all basically across all these columns, if all of these have a value that exists somewhere else collectively, you can have 2 rental IDs once, you can have 2 transaction types that are the same. But if all these match across 2 rows, then you're violating that constraint and it won't let you do it. And I like to think of it, when I think of a natural key, I like to think of it as logical. It's something that's just logical. There's really no technical restraints. It's more of a logical thing. Just like, for example, what's a good example? A good example might be that you have a unique set of possibilities. So, for example, if we have, I'm sure you guys have heard of WordPress, but let's say that you have posts and categories. So like let's say you could categorize blog posts. You might only want a unique blog post title per category or something like that. So something that's kind of natural. All right. And then for step B, we do that. And then step 2 is we insert some data into the common lookup table, which we've done that quite a bit before. So you're just going to insert these data lookup, this data into common lookup, and you want to make sure you watch for that common lookup code because that is there. So you're going to want to make sure you insert the CR for credit and a DR for debit. So that one should be pretty easy. Just some inserts. We've done this a lot, so you should have plenty of examples. In fact, the most notable one is when we insert the rental item type and the price type in, I believe, lab 6. It's either lab 6 or lab 7. Will give you a nice framework to do that step. All right. And step 3 is kind of the doozy of this lab. This lab's actually really, really short. But step 3, if you're going to have a problem, step 3 is where it's going to show up. So not necessarily that it's a doozy, but some things you need to be aware of. So the first thing is that we're going to create yet another table. So we're going to create an airport table, and the airport table is going to hold city and airport combinations, kind of a thing. So for example, SLC, Salt Lake City, is going to be um, in here. So we can actually look at a lot of these because eventually we'll insert them. So you can see like the code SLC is the same. So for Provo, their nearest airport is Salt Lake City. Same thing for Spanish Fork. And same thing if we look at LA, and LA is obviously LAX. San Francisco is SFO. And then San Carlos and San Jose both are at SJC. So you can see basically we're adding cities and we're putting in our codes. And the idea of this is that our rental stores, because again, this is kind of very reminiscent of Blockbuster days. And so our rental stores, make that a little bit bigger, our rental stores would be in cities. And so basically we're going to categorize our memberships by city or by location, because like you can imagine if we have a store in Salt Lake City, or in this case, like if we have a store in Provo, we're going to lump our stuff together by airports essentially, which is a lot of people use that for like regions and stuff. So in step 3, the first thing we do is we create the airport table and the sequence. Then we create a unique natural key. So just like we did in a previous step across these ones. So going to be very similar. And this is actually a good example. Here we have an airport code. So like, let's use Salt Lake City, for example. So our airport code is SLC. Our airport city is Salt Lake City. Now we could have a Provo in here for our city and then Utah for our state province. We wouldn't want to have, this information duplicated, because that's really what a duplicate is. But we could have, let's say there's a Provo in California, we could have a Provo there. So that's why we put that unique constraint on there, is just to make sure we don't have any duplicates. And then step C is we are going to fill the airport table with these cities. So you at least need these. And if you've done everything according to the instructions, if the Potters, and that's the big catch, if the Potters have Provo as their address, then you're good. But you need to put this data in your airport table. Now, one thing where people get stuck is because this is eventually going to be highly dependent upon our contact tables. So what I would do is I would run queries like this. So I could say select distinct, and let's first take a look at what it is. So if we describe address, we can see, oh, we want city and state province. So what I would do is I would say select distinct city, comma, state, province. So we want to see unique combinations of these from address, so we know if we got them all, because we want to make sure we have them all. So there you can see that I have Provo, Spanish Fork, and San Jose. So I just want to make sure that these are in this list. Let's say you put in, Afton, Wyoming, or something like that. You would want to make sure that you have an airport listing for your city if you put that in your database for the Potters, which I don't think anyone did. However, one thing, if you put in all caps, I noticed that a lot of people get confused at when we need all caps and when we don't need all caps. And the rule is, if you're doing something in Common Lookup, unless it's in the Common Lookup description, or Common Lookup meaning. If it's in Common Lookup meaning, caps doesn't matter too much, but everywhere else in Common Lookup, capitalization does matter. And in Oracle, if you're doing string comparison, capitalization does matter immensely. So in this case, you want your cities and your states to be the correct capitalization. So Spanish Fork has a capital S, the rest is lowercase. so on and so forth, which we're going to talk about here in a minute of why that's a big deal. So you want to make sure you at least see those with the correct punctuation. Now, one thing I want to point out is there is a little trick in here, and I don't believe that it says it anywhere, which is kind of strange. But on step C, you'll notice that they have the states all spelled out, which is important, like I just said. And you'll notice that in here we have the abbreviation of California. So if you are in the same case as me, we need to fix that. So we want all the states spelled out. So I'm going to say update address set state underscore province equal to California. And if you have more that's wrong, you can do this for all of them. But I'm going to set state province equal to California, where state province is equal to CA. Now let's see our distinct city state, and now we're looking good. So you just want to make sure that those match 100%. We want those to match perfectly. All right. And then, did we already create the account list table? Create the airport. Created the transaction. When I zoom in, it gets hard for me to follow where I'm at. All right. So then we create our account list table and sequence. Same as before. So we're creating quite a few tables this time, which shouldn't be anything too new. So we create our tables and our sequences. Don't forget the sequence. Now this is the step E, is where we have quite a bit of stuff that's actually been done for us. And so in step E, what we want to do is we want to we're just going to copy and paste this into our file. So for example, let me get this out of the way here. I'm going to run this real quick so that it makes sense. All right, so because this code's actually already written for us, and this is outside of the scope of the class, but it just basically all it's going to do is it's going to create a bunch of accounts for us, and then we're going to assign those accounts. And I'll kind of explain this because I think it helps to explain it, so that way if you run into problems, you kind of have an understanding of where to start looking. So basically what a procedure is a function. So we can rerun this procedure multiple times. And so all we're doing is we are going to, we're selecting the distinct airport code from airport. So I'm actually going to do this just a little bit. So we're going to select distinct airport code from airport. So you can see that I have those 4 rows. So basically it's going to get those 4 rows and it's going to loop through each one. So this is our for I in however many. So you can basically say for 4 times, or for each one of these things, let's loop through it. And then immediately after that, we're going to loop 50 times. So basically for each one of these, times it by 50. So whatever 50 times 4 is, so 200, we're going to loop through this code 200 times. So for LAX, we're going to create an account in account list. So insert into account list, and we're going to get the airport code, and we're going to left pad it, which means we're going to add some numbers, and J is our loop. So basically we're going to add a bunch of numbers, and it's going to pad it with zeros 6 times. So it's going to be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, whatever J is. So 0, 0, 0, which let me show you real quick. So if we take a look down here at these instructions, you'll notice that this gets 50 per each one. And our accounts will end up looking like this. So you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 characters with the whatever the J value was at the end. So our account numbers are going to end up being the airport that you're nearest to, followed by a number. And this way we have a list of accounts. This is going to build our accounts. So that way we have a total, we don't necessarily have an infinite number of accounts. We have a pre-set up list of accounts. So I'm actually going to, so the way this works though, let's take this and we're going to copy this. The way this works is when I run this in my terminal here, if I hit return, you'll notice that it says procedure created, right? But that doesn't mean it ran. So once the procedure is created, that means it's there. It's like a table. It exists in our database, but it hasn't actually executed. So now what we're going to do is we are actually going to execute this this procedure. And the way we do that, it's all right down here, is with this execute seed account list. So if I was putting this, I would copy and paste this code that I just did. And then I would also copy and paste the execute command right after it. Execute seed list. You can put that right in your .sql file. And when it says PL SQL procedure successfully completed, then you know you're good. That means that it actually ran. But one thing I want to show you is that if I break this, so for example, let's drop table account list, right? So let's say you forget to create the account list table, right? Or you have some other issue, like you misspelled a column or something like that. Let's give it a shot. Now you'll notice that it says warning, procedure created with compilation errors. This means that it won't run if I try to execute it. But the hard part is that this doesn't necessarily show you where the errors are. It just says warning that it was created with compilation errors. So to find those errors, when you hit this point, you can type show errors and it will actually show you. And then what's really nice is I actually like this a little bit better because we can actually look, and on line 17, the table or view does not exist. So let's go up here, and these line numbers over here are our corresponding numbers. So on line 17, oh, that account list table doesn't exist. So I need to go look at my code and see why I don't have that table, or did I miss a step? Something like that. So that's how you can diagnose those, because you don't ever have to change the code in this, but you will, you might have an issue outside of this code that this code depends on and therefore won't work. Does that make sense to everybody? Or that should be pretty helpful, I believe, because it should, if you run into issues, that's the best place to start. All right. And that one's going to fill our account list table with 50 accounts for each airport that we have in our database. Oh, and here's that step that I was talking about. So it does mention it where we change our state province. So that is in here. So don't need to worry about that. It'll tell you. And then on step G is where we actually assign account numbers to people based on their member ID. So this is going to do the same thing. So what we're doing is we're running a select statement. So let's actually grab this, and I want to just show you what this is doing again. So if I run this in my console here, you'll notice that we get these rows. And we're going to loop through that again. Oh, and one thing I really want to talk about here, because it's going to come up again. So this is kind of a little bit of a tidbit. When you see this save point, if you are a person who likes to play video games, then this will be an easy concept for you to grasp. So one of my favorite games, Skyrim, one of the things I always do is I save before I go inside of a dungeon. And we all know the reasons why, because if something goes bad, you don't want to, you want to start off but right before things got bad. The closer you save before things got bad, the better, because that means you don't have that much work to redo. So what this save point's doing is literally quite the same. We're going to say, look, create a save point, and we call this all or nothing because we either want it all to work or we don't want any of it to work. So we say, look, let's save where we're at. We're going to keep everything right here tucked away. We're going to save. Now let me go out on a limb here and I'm going to try to do this. And then down here, we commit. So essentially, if it makes it all the way through this, fine. We commit, and that means that we basically made all those changes permanent, meaning that at this point, we can no longer go back to our save point. We're committed. But this little code block here says, hey, if something goes wrong, if there's an exception, if anything goes wrong, we're going to roll back to save point. So if something goes wrong, it's like it never happened. It's a beautiful thing. In fact, I do it all the time. At my real job, it's kind of funny because I always, and it's a great habit to go into, I always create a save point, begin a transaction, and then I'll make a change. And I might do something like as simple as, oh, I'm just trying to delete this one person's rosters because they transferred out of the school or whatever. But then I forget something and I accidentally delete everybody's attendance records and all their schedules for the whole school. And that's something that would make you panic because I mean that's pretty bad, especially in the database world. It's not like you can just hit Control Z, right? But in this case, we kind of can, because if I do that and I'm like, whoa, I just deleted a million records, that's probably not what I wanted to do. I would actually just roll back that transaction. In this case, roll back to save point. So it's always good practice. If you're going to do something kind of important, or in this case, if you're going to do something that you need it to finish, or else it will create a mess in your database, you always want to create these transactions or these save points. And it's huge. And that's called a TCL. So when we get close, since we're getting closer to the finals, TCL, transaction control language, is this save point, rollback, commit. Those are transaction control languages because we're gonna segment all these changes out, and we're gonna have a chance to review it before we actually commit all those changes, which is really nice. So basically, it's like a save game for our database. I think that's like the perfect analogy for that, because if you've ever played like a really hard game, the pain, because I'm sure we've all been at a place where it's like, oh, I made it all the way to here and then something bad happened and then you got to do it all over again. We don't want to do that, especially in production databases. So that's why we use those. Anyways, so we got our list here, our member cursor, which is this one right here. We have our data table essentially, and we're going to loop through that. So we're going to just loop through this in order. So for this row, we're going to loop through and we're going to get this information. Now I can't run this one because it depends on some variables. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to get an account number from account list where it has not been used yet. So we're going to make sure that the account number hasn't been used from account list. But we're going to match that based on the person's city and state. And then we're going to connect that to the airport table. So, we don't need to focus too much on this, but if I take a look, so let's just select everything from account list. Because I ran mine, you'll actually see that a lot of mine are consumed. Let's take a gander here. Get you out of the way. Let's set line size a little bigger. There we go. So let's take a look here. So if we take a look at this, you'll notice that we have our account list ID, our account number, and we can see every little account number here. But the important thing is that we can see these consume date and consume by. And basically that's telling us if this account number is assigned, because these are all of our who audit columns, which we don't really care about. And so by looking at this, we know that we don't have anybody in the LAX area that's a member yet. And if we continue scrolling down, In I actually don't know what this airport is, but in SJC, we have 3 people that are there. And we can see that they were assigned because they were consumed today because I ran the code today. They were assigned and they were consumed by me, meaning I assigned them. And same thing right here. So basically we can track to see if an account number has been used or not, because we have a set list here. So these actually right here, a lot of these are our Potter. One of these is our Potter family, which we could go look. In fact, let's just see which one it is. Select account number from member. So ours would be SLC 006. So this one is our Potters. So they have the account number SLC 0006. So that's what that's doing. It's nothing too crazy. But what's nice is so it marks that as consumed for first. It updates member, so it fixes our member like we see here, where our member table actually has the correct account number, and then it marks it as consumed and puts all the date in there for us. So yeah, so that should be good. And again, the same thing happens. It does say if no data is found, then we have an error in our airport tables. Otherwise, it just says there's an error. So if you get this when you run it, that means that there's a contact in your database that is not matching what's in the airport table. So you want to make sure your state and your city for the airport and contact all match like we talked about earlier. And again, that's going to be the same thing where you'll take and copy that code into your file, followed with the execute update member account, and then that will actually run it for you. And then you should end up with this right here. And that is actually the end of setting up our account numbers and getting that all ready. There is a troubleshooting script that will help you identify some of the differences between the airport table and stuff. So if you run into issues, use this little troubleshooting script right there, because it'll help you out quite a bit. Identify where things don't match. All right, and now the last big step is our step 4, which is where we're actually going to load data from a CSV file. And I don't know if you read the Canvas announcement, but this is a huge part of development workflows. If you're going to deal with a database or any application development or system workflows, you will want to make sure that that you know how to do this, because it's huge. In fact, I do this on a daily basis. I have lots of good friends that went a lot of different directions that actually do this quite a bit. So it's pretty cool. And if you've never heard of it, there's a lot of extract, transform, and load. So if we do a wiki search for this, let's see, extract, transform, load. So it's kind of a thing. You'll see it on job descriptions. It's called ETL. And basically, it's a way for us to get data from one system to another system, because a lot of times they don't match. And so that's essentially what we are simulating here. Is we want to get database, and in this scenario, it's our point of sale system. So you can imagine if we were using something like a Square Reader, all right, but then we also want to track, let's say we're building a backend for us to manage and view our transactions, but not only that, but we also want to provide a website where people can see, if the movie they were looking to rent is actually available. Similar to Redbox, they probably have something similar, but because we're a brick and mortar store, we're using Square because we're kind of a small startup. We might need to build some sort of extract, transfer, and load system to get our data from our Square into our system that we're building. So in this case, The extract part is where we extract it. Now that's the only part we're not going to do, but you would do that with select statements. Or maybe their system has an API where you pull it with Python or something. But in many cases, it's with SQL. So you'll write the SQL to pull down a file, a CSV file. And then from there, we are going to do some various things to it. And that's the transform part, which right now we're kind of doing a little bit out of order because this is kind of the extraction part, and we do a lot of the transforming and loading in lab 10. But real quick, I want to show you the actual CSV file we're going to do. So if I go to this root of my drive here, and there's a file called U01, and in there's a folder called app, and then Oracle and upload. And there's some stuff in here, but the most important one is this transaction upload.csv. If we take a look in here, I'm actually going to open this up. Yep, and it didn't open quite right. Let's try that again because we got to tell it to, let's see. Comma separator, text quote is single. There we go. All right, so this is our CSV file that we're working with. And I'm sure you guys have all seen a CSV file. They're probably like one of the most popular ways to distribute data, work with data. And this is what we're actually dealing with. And you'll notice in here that we have some very familiar information, and you'll notice that our account number is over here, SJC 00001. We can see the account numbers. And this is a huge file, actually. It's pretty massive. These people really like to rent their movies. They've spent a lot with us over the years, apparently. But you can see that. We can see the person, Randy Wynn. We can see the dates. And we don't know we don't have a header row, but we have a 3-day rental. It's a debit, meaning that we charge them. 318 is what we charge them. And there's some other stuff we use, Discover card. And here is their credit card information. So what we're going to do is we are going to take this CSV file and we're going to put it into our database. Well, in this step, we're not actually putting it in our database. We're going to get ready to put it into our database this time, but we're going to be able to use SQL to actually pull this data. So this is the data we're going to be using. I want to just make sure we know where it's at. U01, so / U01 app Oracle upload is where that's at. Let's go back here and let's take a look at these instructions now that we kind of know where we're at. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a table. And we're going to build this transaction upload table. Now I would look right here because it's going to give you some hints. So for example, because this is actually the table description, so it actually gives you a lot of it here, but there's this link right here where it says this will be implemented in an Oracle database as an external table. So then if we click on this link, it actually gives us a way it shows us how to do this right here. So we're going to create a table character. And in this case, we're going to do transaction upload. But the important part is this right here, this organization external. So this is the part that we're going to want. But you can see how we basically build the table just like we normally would. Note, and a big note is we don't worry about constraints and we don't worry about sequences because in this case, the data is already there. And so we don't want to, we can't constrain it. We just want to pull it in. So you're just going to put the column name and the data type in the correct order. And then the important part's this. Now, like I said, they actually kind of give this to you. So I would just build the table like it says here. Guess I got to scroll up and expand all these again. Step 4. So I would just build the table like you normally would. And then I would just copy this right here and put it after it. And then you're good. But just to explain what this does. And to kind of give you an idea. So this is Linux and Oracle virtual directory setup steps. You can skip these. and like I said, it's important to read the instructions. It says open these additional instructions only if you are not using the instructor provided Linux image. So you can skip this, this whole drop down right here. You don't need to worry about it. It's actually already done for you. So we don't need to worry about that. And these ones right here. So you don't need to worry about the drop down, and you don't need to worry about that. We can actually just do this first bit right here with the middle here. So what you're going to do here, and I'll just show you here real quick. So if I were going to build this table, like I said, I would start out with just building my normal table. So in this case, first of all, let's drop this table and drop table transaction upload. And we call it the transaction upload table because we built the transaction table, but this is going to be kind of like our holding pen or our staging area where we pull the data up and then we can put it where we need to from there because this data isn't final. So let's create our table. So I would create my table like I would normally. But at this point, so we have our columns with our data types, something like that. But then on the next line, what I would do is I would just take this and copy it. And what it's doing is it's saying, look, if we have any bad records, put them in this file. If we have any records that we are discarding, put them in this file. And then it's also going to create a log file for us, which we'll show you the log file here in a minute. And apparently I only copied the log file. Let's try that again. There we go. And then we get table created. So now if I do select everything, well, let's not select everything. Let's select the count because everything is a lot. So this is going to tell us how many rows are in this table from transaction upload. So there is 11,520 rows in this table now, because it's pulling from that CSV file. But more importantly, if we take a look here, inside of our U01 App Oracle upload folder, there's this transaction upload log. And I can actually look in here and we can see the log file that happened. So on 11/20, this log file was opened. And we can see as it loaded, it goes through all it parses the file. And we can see that it had, it didn't have any misses. Basically, there's no errors, so it loaded them all. So that's what that log file does. And the other ones, if you have any bad data, it will put them in there as well. The other important part to this, just to show you in case you ever want to upload your own, that fields are terminated by a column or comma. That's why it's a CSV or comma separated values. If you were using like a tab separated value sheet or any other character for that matter, you would just put what character determines when first name stops and last name begins, kind of a thing. And because just like when we open this file manually, it wants us to tell it how we are going to see. If we go to format, just like this, our delimiter is a comma and our text quote, if I try to do a double quote, you'll notice that it doesn't do that. It's optionally enclosed by a single quote. And so we choose comma and a single quote, comma and a single quote. So that's essentially what we're doing. If there's any missing values, we're going to say they're null. And then we give it the name of the file. Now, this default directory upload, this is what has already been created for you up here. And basically what we do is we just say, hey, Oracle, there's this specific folder on my computer that I want you to be aware of. And I'm going to use that to reference files in. So when we say, oh, the default directory upload, it knows, okay, upload is U01 app Oracle upload. So then it says, okay, that's the default directory, and the location within that directory is this file name. So then when it looks here, it's going to say, okay, I'm going to the default directory, U01 app Oracle upload, and I'm going to look for transaction upload.csv, which is this file right there. And then we get all of our rows. And that actually is the end of the lab. So at the end of the lab, if you get 11,520 rows, you are golden as far as that last little step. Does anyone have any questions? And realistically, if you don't have any problems, this lab actually should go pretty quick because a lot of it's copy paste. The only real heavy lifting we have to do is we have to build a couple tables and insert some data. But that's just good practice. At this point, it shouldn't be anything too crazy and new. So it should just be all good fun. All right, I'm not seeing any questions roll in, so I'm going to assume that it's good. If you come across with any questions along the way, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, good luck this week.